Hey everyone, I wanted to welcome you back. Congratulations, we made it to week 3 in our class. And today's lecture is brought to you by Mickey Mouse. So I'm wearing my Mickey Mouse t-shirt while I give this lecture. In part, before summer school started, I took my family, we went to Disney World in Orlando and just had a lot of fun. So I'm in good spirits. So I figured let's wear my Mickey Mouse t-shirt and represent. I've got a 6-year-old and a 13-year-old. We had a lot of fun. But let me get back to class. So the discussion boards with regards to rhetoric have just been fantastic. I've loved how students have added to their definition of rhetoric. There have been some really great ideas in the discussion board piece. And we now know that rhetoric uses 3 things, right? It uses logos, pathos, ethos. So we know rhetoric uses logic, emotion, and character and authority. So now we're going to get a little bit deeper into our understanding of rhetoric. So now we're going to talk about fallacies. So before you continue with this lecture, you might want to use your St. Martin's Handbook and look over on between pages 150 and 155, and they will give you some background to this lecture, right? There'll be some discussion pieces on fallacies, and there's something between like 15 and 17 specific fallacies that the St. Martin's Handbook talks about. So one of the things that I always think is interesting is when we shift gears and talk about fallacies, sometimes students kind of panic. They think, oh my God, what is a fallacy? Or they think fallacies are going to be hard or they're going to be boring. But in many cases, fallacies are really kind of interesting. Some fallacies are really funny. Some fallacies are really stupid. But I think it's important that we understand how fallacies work. So the first thing I would normally do in a ground class is I would ask students, well, let's first define what the term fallacy means. And so if you listen to the word, you hear the word, or you look at the word, right, most students can kind of associate a fallacy with just something that is false, right? Sometimes in a ground class, students will define fallacies as false logic. So I think it's important that we understand what fallacies are. I define fallacies a little bit differently. So I'll define fallacies as false logic. And if we want to accept my definition of rhetoric, which as of week 3, I'm still going to maintain that rhetoric is words that are used to manipulate, to deceive, and con people. And so what happens if we go out into the real world and we come across someone who is using rhetoric and we catch them using a fallacy, saying something that's false, or using false logic, what happens is our brain starts to critically think, and rhetoric has less of an impact on us. There's one definition of rhetoric, which is the deliberate use of fallacies. And really, fallacies are the way that rhetoric starts to shift itself away from an argument. An argument will always try to avoid fallacies, and rhetoric will always use fallacies. So if we look at between the 15 and give or take 17 fallacies in our St. Martin's handbooks, again, some of them are silly, some of them are funny, and some of them are just crazy. So one of the fallacies that I always like is I like the ad hominem. So if you look at the ad hominem, an ad hominem is when you attack a person's character rather than addressing the issue. So an ad hominem is when you attack a person's character rather than addressing the issue. So imagine that you have a student in our class who goes out and says, hey, don't take Professor Gutowski's class, he's just like Hitler. Don't take Professor Gutowski's class, he's just like Stalin. Don't take Professor Gutowski's class, he's a son of a bitch. Well, notice what that student did was attacked my character. Notice that student didn't address an issue. That student said, hey, don't take Professor Gutowski's online class because it's hard. Don't take Professor Gutowski's online class because he doesn't always respond to emails. Don't take Professor Gutowski's class because he has you read books that you've already read in high school, like Into the Wild. Right? Instead, what that imaginary student did was attack my character. So that's one reason I like the ad hominem. The second fallacy that I always find interesting is I like the non sequitur. And the non sequitur is when you take 2 things that have nothing in common and you try to join them together. So non sequitur, you take 2 things that have nothing in common and try to join them together. So imagine that same student says, hey, don't take Professor Gutowski's class, it's just like Auschwitz. Don't take Professor Gutowski's class, it's just like being at Dachau. Don't take Professor Gutowski's class because it's just like being in a concentration camp. So notice what that student did was took two things that have absolutely nothing in common. Our class and a concentration camp, right? And those two things have absolutely nothing in common. And I think the reason why I like those two fallacies is because we see them all the time, right? We see them all the time in politics, right? Don't vote for Hillary Clinton, she's crazy. Don't vote for Hillary Clinton, she's a Democrat. Don't vote, right? I always like when George W. Bush was running for president, they said, don't vote for George W. Bush. He's stupid, he's clumsy, and he can't say the word nuclear. And notice both of those are ad hominem attacks, right? They attack a person's character rather than addressing an issue. Don't vote for Hillary Clinton, she's going to expand Obamacare. Don't vote for George W. Bush, he's going to cut taxes, right? So I like those two fallacies because we see them all the time, especially in politics, which it becomes important to critically think. Then there's, one other fallacy I think is pretty easy is the bandwagon, right? The bandwagon is everyone else is doing it, why aren't you, right? So here's what I want you to do for the next discussion board question. The next discussion board question, there are between 15 and 17 fallacies in our St. Martin's Handbook. I want you to pick the one fallacy that you like the best and tell me why, and then pick the one fallacy that you like the least and tell me why. And this will just help us to understand how fallacies work as we continue to understand rhetoric and arguments. I'm looking forward to everything for this week because, again, the discussion board questions, everything has been great. So have a great week 3, and I'll look forward to see what you put online.